Hello everybody, we are Brigade of Beans and Diagnosed Dissociative Identity Disorder System. My name is Atlas and this video is all about subsystems. So to start this video off, I want to acknowledge our little assistant Brandy up here. I believe she's in frame. And also my visual assistant. I have done some artwork for you all, which I don't normally do. And this will make more sense as I get into the video and explain what subsystems are, how they function, and why they might form. Now that she is situated, I don't know how long she'll stay here, I wanted to add some disclaimers. First off, we're not a mental health professional, we are just one DID system talking about our experiences and kind of consolidating different experiences that we've read and learned about over the past several years of educating ourselves around DID. Secondly, I want to add that this is not a complete list, hence the and more. And also that you don't have to fit into one of these boxes specifically. Most subsystems in our system tick at least two of these different boxes, but it is possible to fit just within one. So subsystems are essentially just a grouping of alters within a system. It can depend on many different factors, which I've highlighted here, and probably more that I've forgotten to add. They also don't just have to fit into one of these boxes. We've had many subsystems within our system who've checked multiple of these boxes, and you can have subsystems within subsystems, and it can keep going semi-indefinitely. So the first type of subsystem we've got is location-based. This type of subsystem exists in a different part of the headspace, and it's not just like a different part, like this is a different house to this house. It is entirely separate from the rest of the system and has high amnesia barriers, hence this line, between them, and alters within those two areas are typically not able to travel internally or communicate internally at all to begin with. Obviously, this can change and adapt over time with therapy, with practicing communication, with journaling and all of that. And inner worlds can also change. So subsystems that exist in different parts of the inner world can integrate. And although the alters might not fuse, those areas of the inner world can come together and become a more level playing field. Also, in terms of location-based subsystems, it can be sometimes hard to work out what qualifies, but we just in our system use the term that feels right. If for us they feel very separate and there is, as I said, that decreased communication, we then tend to chalk that up to being a location-based subsystem. The second one we have is alters within alters. These two here are two alters within the same system, and then this alter is also part of a subsystem that then has alters of their own. And this can also stack indefinitely, and you can have alters within alters within alters within alters. It can get quite complex, and it can make communication very difficult because this alter and this alter cannot communicate unless this alter is fronting within this inner world body, or unless this alter sends messages through this alter to this alter. That was a mouthful, and I'm sure you can see already how much more complex communication and working together as a system can become when you've got different subsystems going on. Next up, we have trauma groupings. So these are alters who, again, are separate and have decreased communication between these groupings, but each grouping is responsible for holding on to all of the memories related to a specific trauma. I'm going to use some non-trauma examples for this, just to keep this video relatively light, but know that I'm not actually talking about cruisy experiences, I am talking about trauma experiences. Hypothetically, this blue team might all have memories of going to a specific swimming pool and swimming in that pool. They have different experiences, they have different roles, they have different functions, but they all remember the same event or remember aspects of the same event or of the same location or of the same theme. In the second group, we might have alters that have always done hikes. This could be in different locations, different lengths, different people around, but they all remember doing hikes at different points in time, and they are in a group together. Then this third group might remember watching TV. And so every single time that the TV has been watched, an alter within this group holds those memories. So they all remember watching TV, but they remember different shows, they remember different times and different places. But they are all still connected by their collective memories of TV watching. Next, we have alter support or alter specific support. This is when one alter has alters that specifically care for them, and typically those alters only really communicate with the alter they are supporting, or only have communication with the alter they're supporting. This can be combined with alters within alters, but doesn't necessarily have to be. The next one we have is communication-based. So these are alters that can communicate with each other, but not with other alters who can communicate with each other. So say this group might have fairly decent internal communication, they could front together, they experience low amnesia, but if an alter from here fronts, they experience blackout amnesia. But within this grouping, one of those two confront and they can be co-con, or they only experience partial amnesia. And so it's all about how much communication, and it doesn't just mean talking, that also means memory sharing, is divided, and how much amnesia exists and where it is positioned within the system, if that makes sense. The next one we have is function-based. I know this kind of looks like a car accident. It isn't. He's on the pavement. I promise he is not being run over. But these are alters who all fulfill one function. So this might be grouped by role, or caretakers, or protectors, or the little example I've given, all alters who are involved with anything to do with cars. So there might be one alter who is responsible for driving, one alter who is responsible for sitting in the back of the car, and another alter who is responsible for road safety, or who is responsible for fixing cars and that sort of thing. And whilst they all do different things, they also all exist within the same capacity of cars. And the final one that I have a direct example for is structures. So these are alters who either make up an internal structure or make up an internal presence, or alters who are in some way physically connected to each other, alters who are always holding hands, that sort of thing. So I've drawn a tower. This would be most likely alters who are physically stacked on top of each other, and they might look like people, or they might look like different sections of a building. There are also probably far more ways that subsystems can present. This is just ones that have presented and been around within our system. So some antecedents within our own system. I, Atlas, am part of a subsystem. My subsystem is both alters within alters, communication-based, and alter-specific support. So I am our host, and throughout our entire life, our host has had a subsystem of alters dedicated to just helping them. So currently my subsystem consists of two alters. There is myself and there is Arca. Arca is also my sister. She's younger than me, but she helps me with a lot of things, like when I have high anxiety. She is a calming presence. She's also very good at relaxing and making sure that we chill out so that I'm not pushing ourselves too far. And she specifically helps me moderate my behaviors. And she doesn't help anyone else in the system, she just helps me. She also doesn't have communication with anyone else within the system unless she is fronting with me or she is fronting. And then she can communicate with other alters in front. But when we are internal, she can only communicate with me. When it comes to location-based subsystems, we have quite a few of these. As I kind of mentioned about how inner worlds can integrate, and these subsystems can just become one, that happens to us quite frequently as well. One of our main location-based subsystems is the front-facing system. So these are alters who are heavily involved in our life. That doesn't necessarily mean they front frequently, but they either hold large sections of memory from our life, they help decide what we're doing with our life, or are in some way very important to our external life. We also then have other inner world locations internally, like the hospital, where a lot of alters exist who need a lot of support and a lot of help. Elle, who's made a video about her role, works within the hospital to support alters there who are struggling. And so the hospital and the front-facing system internally don't really have much communication. We can front together, and it's only when we're in front together that we can communicate back and forth, or if alters who are what we call bridges specifically communicate. So within our system, there is an alter role called a bridge who is able to travel between different location-based subsystems. When it comes to alter-specific help, another example from within our system is Pip. Pip has since fused, but when Pip first split, she split as herself, the primary or the main alter within the subsystem, and then had two fragments. There was an angel fragment and a demon fragment, and they sat on her shoulders and gave her messages. There wasn't much to these angel and demon alters, hence why they were fragments. They would just kind of push positive or negative emotions towards Pip to help direct her in her life and what she was doing when she was fronting. It's Maribelle. Atlas is still co-fronting with me, but I want to talk about being a trauma grouping subsystem. So I'm no longer a subsystem, I've fused, but the alters who fused into me made up a subsystem. Also, I'm not going to go into my specific trauma, so no need to worry about that too much. I do want to talk about that experience. So there were 5 alters in my subsystem, and we all held one specific trauma that the rest of the system did not. They had no awareness that this trauma even existed until we made contact and started communicating with them. Our function as a subsystem was to keep this trauma entirely separate from the rest of the system and keep it unknown. However, no one alter could handle that by themselves. It was too much to carry alone. And so the five of us carried it together. And we existed as also a communication-based subsystem where we could communicate with each other, but not anyone outside of the subsystem, until we started to work on that and develop those skills. It can be very isolating being a communication-based and a trauma-based subsystem, because there was so much that we couldn't share with the rest of the system, and there was so much that set us apart from the rest of the system, and that can be incredibly isolating and make you feel incredibly lonely. Even when there are other alters within your subsystem, you are all separate from the system as a whole, the system as a collective, and that is quite distressing at times. It just kind of sucked. And I'm glad that I'm no longer part of a subsystem. I know that it was very important for us. I know that it was crucial to allowing us to survive that time of our life, but it also comes with so many downsides, and it's just really, really hard to navigate. Just because a trauma-based subsystem exists doesn't mean that all alters within that subsystem are trauma holders. There were trauma holders within my subsystem, yes, but also protectors, also peacekeepers, and also caretakers. Also, just because you have a group of alters that remember a trauma doesn't automatically make them a subsystem. I don't know how else to put it other than depends on the vibe. Amnesia exists between all alters, that's why we're separate. So I'm not saying that these alters within this grouping have no amnesia to each other. They do. It's just that the amnesia between alters within a subsystem, like this or like this, are lower. It's easier to navigate, it's easier to communicate, it's easier to reach through those barriers. And then there is a very thick, very heavy, pretty much impenetrable to start with, barrier preventing you and the rest of the system from reaching each other. Sometimes when you have subsystems, alters within that system will all share a name or all share a theme. We used to have a subsystem that was the silver subsystem, and all their names were silver, with like with an additional word adding on to that, like big silver or sad silver. But that doesn't have to be. You can all have vastly different names. All the alters within my subsystem had names that started with an M. As you can tell, the alters within our host subsystem, names will start with an A, but we've also had subsystems where their names are entirely different and have no common theme. But that is something that could potentially pop up. Right, my assistant is back with some bribes. She might not stay for long, but I wanted to touch on a type of subsystem that we forgot to add to this little sheet here, and that is subsystems of the same alter. So this is more like how an OSDD system might present, where there is one alter stuck at different life stages who all have a similar sense of identity, but there's still distinct barriers between them. So for example, this isn't something we've experienced, so I am just going to have to use a hypothetical here. You might have Brandy as an alter, and Brandy exists at 28 years old. And then there is also another alter who is Brandy, who is 17 years old. Another alter who is Brandy, who is 10 years old. And all three of those alters are heavily connected to each other, but they are still distinctly different, and so they exist within a subsystem of their own. There are probably more ways as well that I've forgotten to list that subsystems can present within a system. So if there is a subsystem within your system and you do not resonate with any of this, that's totally okay. As I said, this is mostly just based off of our experiences. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments. If you feel like liking and subscribing, that would be deeply appreciated. We've just hit 700 subs, which is amazing. We never thought we'd get here. So thank you all so much for coming along this hectic little journey that is our page. We will see you in the next video. Make sure you're staying hydrated, satiated, and caffeinated. Bye.